Breaking news has sent shockwaves across North America. Donald Trump has just dropped a political bombshell right at Canada's border. And the reaction north of the line has been nothing short of explosive. Crowds are gathering, headlines are flashing, and officials in Ottawa are scrambling to respond. But what exactly happened, and why is this moment being described as one of the most tense standoffs in U.S. Canada relations in recent years? Imagine waking up to find out that one decision, announced overnight, could shift the balance of trade, security, and even diplomacy between two of the closest allies in the world. That's exactly where we are today. Trump's announcement isn't just about a policy. It's about reshaping how America sees its northern neighbor and how Canada handles pressure from Washington. For many Canadians, it feels like a punch to the gut. For many Americans, it feels like long overdue tough talk. But no matter which side of the border you're on, one thing is clear: this is a story that could change the future of North America as we know it. So, what's really going on? Let's break it down. Canada and the United States share the longest undefended border in the world, a 500-mile stretch that has stood as a symbol of peace and cooperation for more than a century. From free trade to shared security, the two countries have built a relationship that most of the world views as rock solid. But recent events have begun to test that bond. Donald Trump, known for his hardline stance on trade and his willingness to take bold, sometimes controversial steps, has once again thrust Canada into the spotlight. At a rally near the border, he unveiled a decision that has rattled both political leaders and ordinary citizens. While details are still emerging, the move is being described as a bombshell because it touches on sensitive issues like border security, economic independence, and national sovereignty. For the United States, Trump argues it's about protecting American jobs and strengthening borders. For Canada, it feels like a sudden and aggressive shake-up of a partnership they thought was built on trust. And in today's interconnected world, such a clash doesn't just stay between two countries. It ripples across global markets, military alliances, and even the everyday lives of people who cross that border for work, family, or trade. The stakes couldn't be higher. Number 1, the border security shake-up. When most people think about border tensions in North America, their minds immediately go south, to the U.S.-Mexico border. That line has dominated political debates for decades, with talk of walls, illegal crossings, and immigration crisis. But Trump's latest move flips the script, shifting attention to the north, where the U.S. and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world. For decades, this border has been more of a handshake than a barrier, allowing goods, families, and workers to cross with minimal disruption. Now, Trump's announcement threatens to change all of that in ways both symbolic and practical. According to his remarks, the plan involves a sweeping set of changes aimed at tightening control and monitoring every entry point into the United States from Canada. This could mean stricter passport checks, longer wait times at border crossings, and even expanded surveillance technologies like drones, sensors, and facial recognition systems. In some areas, military presence or National Guard deployments are also being discussed. For Canadians, the shock comes from the fact that their border with the U.S. has historically been defined by cooperation, not confrontation. The idea of soldiers patrolling stretches of forest, farmland, or small, town crossings feels more like something from a Cold War movie than modern North America. The potential impact on daily life cannot be overstated. Millions of people cross the U.S.-Canada border every year for shopping trips, family visits, business deals, or simple tourism. Towns along the border often function almost like one community, with people living on one side and working on the other. If checkpoints tighten and security measures become more intrusive, those easy connections could suddenly become stressful and costly. Trucking companies, airlines, and shipping firms are already sounding alarms about possible slowdowns that would ripple through supply chains. Supporters of Trump's decision argue that times have changed, and so must border policy. They point to national security concerns, citing the possibility of smugglers, terrorists, or other threats using the quieter northern border as an easier entry point. Why should we treat Canada differently? They ask, framing it as a matter of fairness and safety. Critics, however, argue that the move is more political theater than practical necessity, designed to flex muscle and score points with a base that values toughness on borders. no matter where those borders are. What makes this development especially explosive is the message it sends, that even the friendliest neighbor isn't immune from suspicion. For Canadians, this feels like a rupture in trust. For Americans, it sparks debate about how much security is worth sacrificing convenience and goodwill. And as this plan rolls out, the world is watching to see if the so-called peace border of North America is about to become just another flashpoint in global politics. Number 2. The economic domino effect. If border security is the emotional spark of Trump's announcement, the economic side is the thunderclap that could follow. Canada and the United States share one of the largest trading partnerships in the world. Every day, nearly $2 billion worth of goods and services cross the border, from cars and steel to dairy and lumber. The economies of the two countries are intertwined in ways that touch everything from the price of groceries to the stability of energy grids. That's why Trump's hints at new economic measures aimed at Canadian exports have created shockwaves in both Ottawa and Washington. The sectors most at risk are the ones that have historically been flashpoints: lumber, dairy, and energy. Trump has long argued that Canada benefits unfairly from trade, pointing to subsidies, tariffs, and what he describes as unbalanced deals that hurt American workers. His latest comments suggest that tariffs or quotas could be slapped onto key Canadian goods, raising costs for U.S. businesses that rely on them and, in turn, driving up prices for American consumers. The Canadian dairy industry, for example, has been a constant source of tension, with U.S. farmers complaining that Canada's supply management system shuts them out of markets. If new barriers are imposed, Canadian farmers could see devastating losses, while American shoppers might notice higher prices in the dairy aisle. The lumber industry tells a similar story. Canadian softwood lumber is crucial for U.S. construction, and disputes over pricing and subsidies go back decades. A sudden tariff hike could make homes more expensive to build in the U.S., worsening already high housing costs. Energy is another major area of concern. Canada is America's largest foreign supplier of oil and natural gas. If border slowdowns or tariffs disrupt this flow, both economies could feel the pain almost immediately, with potential knock-on effects in global energy markets. Supporters of Trump's stance say the shake-up is necessary to reset the relationship, ensuring that the U.S. doesn't get taken advantage of. They argue that Canada needs America far more than America needs Canada, and that leverage should be used to secure better terms. Critics counter that the costs will be mutual and heavy. By disrupting a tightly linked supply chain, the U.S. risks hurting its own economy almost as much as Canada's. Experts warn that prolonged trade fights could trigger job losses, higher consumer prices, and strained relationships with other allies who rely on smooth U.S.-Canada trade. The economic domino effect, in other words, could fall quickly and unpredictably. A policy meant to project strength might instead unleash instability, not just between two neighbors but across global markets that depend on North America's stability. And once those dominoes start tipping, they can be very hard to stop. Number 3. The political shockwaves in Ottawa. The political fallout in Canada has been nothing short of dramatic. Almost overnight, Trump's bombshell has turned into a test of leadership for Prime Minister and his government. In Ottawa, lawmakers are scrambling to respond, knowing that how they handle this crisis could reshape Canadian politics for years to come. Already, opposition parties are seizing on the moment to accuse the government of being caught off guard, unprepared, and too dependent on Washington's goodwill. The image of Canada as a stable, secure partner suddenly looks fragile in the face of this new pressure. Inside Parliament, fiery debates have erupted over what the country's response should be. Some argue Canada must stand firm, push back, and show that it cannot be bullied by its southern neighbor. Others suggest a more pragmatic approach, quiet negotiations, concessions where necessary, and an effort to avoid escalation at all costs. For ordinary Canadians, this divide reflects a larger national question: should Canada double down on its relationship with the U.S., or begin looking more seriously toward diversifying alliances with Europe, Asia, and even China? The crisis has also exposed cracks within the ruling party itself. Cabinet ministers responsible for trade, defense, and foreign affairs are under intense pressure, facing questions not only from the opposition, but also from their own colleagues. The Prime Minister's approval ratings, which were already under strain from domestic issues like inflation and healthcare shortages, could take a further hit if the government is seen as weak in the face of U.S. demands. On the other hand, a bold, successful response could strengthen his leadership and give him the chance to frame himself as a defender of Canadian sovereignty. Beyond Parliament Hill, provincial leaders are making their voices heard too. Premiers from border provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia are warning that new border policies and trade restrictions could devastate local economies. Their message to Ottawa is clear: act fast, or risk economic fallout that will hit ordinary families and businesses hard. Meanwhile, in Alberta and Saskatchewan, provinces heavily reliant on energy exports, there's a growing sense of urgency about protecting Canada's resource-based economy. The political shockwaves don't stop at Canada's borders. International observers are watching to see how Ottawa manages the crisis. If Canada appears indecisive or fractured, it could weaken its standing on the global stage. If it responds with unity and strength, it might not only preserve its partnership with the U.S., but also send a message to the world that Canada is more than just America's junior partner. Either way, this crisis has become a defining moment for Canadian politics, one that will test leadership, shape future elections, and perhaps even redefine what it means to be a Canadian ally in a turbulent world. Number 40. Historical context and rising tensions. To understand why this latest announcement feels so explosive, it's worth stepping back and looking at the history of U.S.-Canada relations. On the surface, the relationship has always seemed friendly, even easy. The two countries share cultural similarities, economic ties, and military alliances that most nations envy. But beneath that image of harmony, there have always been moments of friction, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud. And Trump's latest move may represent not just a new policy, but the resurfacing of old tensions that have been simmering for decades. Take trade, for example. Disputes over lumber, dairy, and energy go back generations. The so-called softwood lumber wars have flared up repeatedly since the 1980s, with each side accusing the other of unfair subsidies and practices. Dairy has been another thorny issue, with Canada's supply management system often criticized by American farmers. While these disputes were usually managed through negotiation, they revealed a deeper truth that even close friends can clash when national interests collide. Trump's bombshell taps directly into these long-standing sore spots, reopening wounds that many thought had healed. Security is another area where tensions have occasionally risen. After 9/11, the U.S. tightened border controls dramatically, and Canada was suddenly forced to rethink how secure its own borders really were. At the time, Canadians accepted stricter measures as part of a global fight against terrorism. But today's shift feels different. Instead of being framed as a mutual effort, Trump's announcement paints Canada as a potential weak link, a neighbor that can't be trusted without tougher oversight. For many Canadians, this characterization feels like an insult to a relationship built on decades of shared sacrifice, from World War II to Afghanistan. What also makes this moment stand out is Trump himself. His history with Canada is well documented. During his presidency, he sparred with Canadian leaders over tariffs, NAFTA renegotiations, and G7 meetings. The image of Trump calling Canadian trade practices unfair and labeling leaders as weak remains fresh in many memories. For his critics, this latest move is just another chapter in a pattern of undermining USA-Canada relations. For his supporters, it's a continuation of his America First agenda, proving that he's consistent in putting U.S. interests above all else. Historians note that while U.S.-Canada relations have always survived past disputes, today's world is far more fragile. With global conflicts brewing, energy markets unstable, and international alliances under strain, a rupture between two of the world's closest allies could have consequences far beyond their shared border. This moment, they argue, isn't just another chapter in the long history of disputes. It may be a turning point that defines the future trajectory of North America itself. Number 50. The global ripple effect. What happens between the U.S. and Canada doesn't stay between the U.S. and Canada. This latest crisis is already sending ripples across the globe, with allies and rivals alike watching closely to see how it plays out. And for good reason. The partnership between these two neighbors isn't just bilateral. It's a cornerstone of broader alliances, trade networks, and global security frameworks. If it cracks, the aftershocks will be felt far beyond North America. One of the first areas of concern is NATO. Both the U.S. and Canada are founding members of the alliance, and their cooperation is essential for everything from joint military exercises to intelligence sharing. A visible rift could weaken NATO's unity at a time when it faces challenges from Russia, terrorism, and rising global instability. If Canada feels sidelined or undermined, it might reconsider its military commitments or resist pressure to increase defense spending, as the U.S. has long demanded. That could embolden adversaries who are eager to exploit divisions in the Western alliance. Global markets are also reacting. The U.S.-Canada economic partnership is massive, and disruptions at their border instantly affect industries worldwide. Automakers in Europe, for example, rely on North American supply chains. Energy markets are equally sensitive. Canada is a top exporter of oil, and any slowdown in cross-border flows could drive up global prices. Investors are already watching closely, knowing that even small changes in trade or border policies can ripple outward and shake confidence in financial markets. Meanwhile, rivals like China and Russia see opportunity in this crisis. Both countries benefit when Western allies are distracted or divided. If Washington and Ottawa become locked in a dispute, Beijing and Moscow can quietly push forward with their own agendas, expanding influence in Asia, the Middle East, and even the Arctic, where Canada plays a key strategic role. Analysts warn that the more divided the U.S. and Canada appear, the easier it becomes for adversaries to exploit that weakness on the world stage. There's also the human side of the ripple effect. International students, tourists, and business travelers who move between the two countries could find themselves caught in the middle of stricter border rules. Airlines, tech firms, and universities that depend on cross-border collaboration might struggle to adapt. In a world still recovering from pandemic disruptions, another layer of uncertainty could slow global recovery and deepen existing inequalities. In short, the global ripple effect is both wide and unpredictable. What began as a policy announcement on one border could, if mishandled, turn into a chain reaction touching everything from NATO unity to energy prices and geopolitical rivalries. And that's why the world is watching so closely. Not because it's unusual for the U.S. and Canada to disagree, but because this time, the consequences could spread far beyond their shared border and reshape the global order itself. Trump's bombshell at Canada's border has ignited a firestorm of reactions, from panic in Ottawa to cautious support in parts of the United States. What happens next will depend on how both governments respond, whether they choose confrontation, compromise, or something in between. But one thing is certain: the decisions made in the coming weeks will shape not just the U.S.-Canada relationship, but also the role both nations play on the world stage. As the situation develops, one question remains: is this the beginning of a new chapter of tension between two close allies? Or will cooler heads prevail to preserve one of the world's most important partnerships?